If you're having any trouble with the visual, please just chat us and we'll do our best to help you out from a technical perspective. Hello, greetings everyone, and welcome to our first state team webinar, technical assistance webinar for 2021. We're excited to have you join us today. We have a very exciting presenter. Many of you know her and love her and have had the opportunity to learn from her before. But Rylin Rodgers, who is the Director of Public Policy at the Association of University Centers on Disability, is our speaker today. We're very excited to learn from and with her. The title of her presentation today is Sustainability, Impact, Need, Data, Storytelling, and Magic, which is not something you hear every day in the context of sustainability. So we're super excited. Ben, if you wouldn't mind switching to the next slide for me. Just as a quick aside, it looks like we've got many members of state teams with us today, which we're very excited to have. We also have some members of our National Advisory Committee here with us today, which again, we're very excited to have them join us. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. And Anna Maria Padlin, who is our HRSA project officer, is also here with us today, so welcome to her. A couple of quick housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded. Oh no, that terrible joke got recorded for posterity. Please don't use your speakerphone if you're on your phone, if you're not using just your computer audio. Please don't put us on hold. Please mute your phone if you are on the handset, or mute your computer speakers when you're not speaking. You can press the mute button on your handheld phone or press *6 to mute and *6 to mute again to unmute. Otherwise, in the lower left-hand corner of your computer screen, there should be a little microphone icon. You can click on that to mute yourself if you're just using your computer audio. Participation is essential, especially today. We really wanted to try to make this a dynamic conversation with you all to help give you some time to work as a team, to jumpstart your sustainability planning if you haven't started thinking about it already, or if you have started to think about it already, to make some progress around that. But we are going to do some sharing at the end of the webinar, and we're hoping that this will be a great opportunity for you all to do some peer coaching and mentoring and sharing with one another. So please don't hesitate to either participate through the chat box or raise your hand if you'd like to speak auditorily, or just go ahead and interrupt us and say, I have a question. If you have technical issues, please chat them directly to Jessica Flaherty, who is our tech guru, and she will be helping you with the breakout logistics. If you have content questions or comments, though, please address them to the whole group. Please make sure that everyone is clicked on the chat box so that we can all take advantage of your questions and your comments. If you have a question about something, odds are other people do too, and we all want to learn from one another's wisdom. If you have the opportunity to link your phone with your computer, that would be great, so that we know whose sort of mysterious telephone number is attached to which wonderful person we know and love. The directions for doing so are being shown on the animation right now. If you have any questions about this, it goes by pretty quickly. Please go ahead and chat that to Jessica, and she can give you a hand with it. Let's go ahead and switch to the next slide, Ben.
Yeah, I can take this one, Meg. A little bit later in the webinar, we're going to be going into breakout groups, as we explained, and we're going to be doing it a little bit differently than we have in the past. And so something that would be helpful for us in doing that is if you could put your state team before your name in Zoom if you are able. And me and Bethlyn and Jessica are modeling that with BU there. So if you're on Team Massachusetts, you could say Massachusetts dash your name, or just anything so that it's prominently displayed what state you're in. And that'll help people to get where they're going later. Some instructions for doing that is once you have access to the participant list in Zoom, and if you don't, you can go to the bottom of your screen and click on participants. You'll see your name up at the top of the list. If you wave your mouse over your name here, you'll see the mute and more options come up. And when you click on more, it'll give you the option to rename yourself. When that comes up, rename it as we described, and then you can click OK, and we'll all see it that way. So a little bit more on that later, but anyone who can do that and is using the computer, that would be helpful. I think Bethlyn, you were going to take this slide. Bethlyn,
All right,
okay.
I muted myself on my end. Since we gathered together last, a lot has transpired, and we just wanted to take this moment. I feel like every time I meet with a group of people, there's just a need to kind of recognize where we are so we can then presence ourselves and move from there. So just throw into the chat what you're feeling, and others will recognize it as I start to just go over this agenda, and we can all kind of connect and share in that understanding, and then be here for what we need to for this work, and have that not be have it be part of and the foundation of what we're doing, and not aside from it, because we bring our full selves to what, that's part of what makes it a human, brings the humanity to the work and makes us able to be effective. So if you can move to the next slide, as everyone's throwing in how they're feeling. I see already some coming in. There was frazzled, chilly, anxious, overwhelmed. Oh my goodness, I'm sure people can really relate to these. So we've already been working on this first part of the agenda. We're going to have this conversation with Rylin that's really just going to help us really take a larger view of where we're at with our sustainability, and really give you then, that's going to go till 3:25 and give you some real deep dive team time just to get yourselves going. That 45 minutes where you bring in whatever you've been doing, you take hopefully some tools we have will help you today. You have your pre-survey that we're going to make sure you have at hand. You have your data from cycle 3 and comparative data, and pull that together and really just kind of build traction around your team time. We'll come back together and use that. The share out time is really a dynamic time with all of us together. We're at that point where sometimes the questions are just as important as the answers. So we ask the questions, we come together and we see what we can do together, because sustainability, no one's got it figured out. If they did, then it would all be being sustained already. And then we're going to wrap up quickly. So I'm going to hand it back because we want to give Rylin as much time as possible. So we're going to go right to her. And thank you folks for throwing in your how you're feeling. I'm going to do the same. Thanks, Rylin. You go for it. Show us the magic and bliss.
So good afternoon, everyone. And I will say, you know, spoiler alert, the magic in sustainability is all of you. And I'm looking at many familiar faces, many faces, frankly, of heroes in this space who are doing remarkable work around the country. And I want us to think about what we can do together and individually to make that work continue, and to think about how to use the lessons learned from what has been a challenging American moment and really global moment. So we'll move from there. Next slide, please. As Bethlyn mentioned, I think it's particularly important to recognize the space that we're in. When we're thinking about sustainability for your efforts, really many of you have so many successes about what's happened as you pivoted in a challenging environment in the last almost, actually it is now a year of being in a pandemic, that we can think about those lessons to think about sustainability. But it's really valuable to take that deep breath and remember that we're having this conversation in a space that includes 3 interconnected ongoing emergencies, the global pandemic, and we're definitely feeling the real challenges of how are we going to get out of this as a regular part of our work these days. The reality of Americans' history with racism, and that there is attention to that reckoning in a new way, really driving our work, and that we're seeing that connection to disproportionate impact of COVID in communities of color around our country, both in the economic impact, in the infection rates, and then really painfully, tragically, in the lives lost. And that really speaks to the economy piece. The reality is that I think most of us think about sustainability. One of the things we think about is money and how are we going to pay for this work? And that can feel really hard to think about in this space where we're aware that we are at the greatest economic recession since the Great Depression, and that's super cheerful. And that many of you are faced with state budgets that are impacting your organizational sustainabilities. think I could ask for a show of hands about who's been facing a cut in any part of your work. And it's many of you. And it's not sort of one piece or the other. We're seeing this impact our hospital systems in revenue, particularly in the lack of revenue for pediatrics. But then others, really the whole category of state government. So those pieces. I don't know about you, but I had real hopes for a start to 2021 that would be a new start moving us forward. The first 3 weeks in January were particularly challenging. There are many memes, even before the Bernie Sanders memes, to allow us a space to really talk about that maybe those New Year's dreams didn't really feel that effective immediately. I think the last 3 Wednesdays, and really taking a moment to recognize that the first Wednesday in January faced the insurrection. And the second Wednesday in January, we had the second impeachment of the president. And then the third Wednesday in January was inauguration. Any one of those things would have been a lot and would have in many ways shifted sort of the world and the conversation. But all of those things, also that pattern really makes me worried, and I've stocked up on chocolate for this coming Wednesday, because what is the fourth Wednesday in January? It can't possibly be good. So let's hope that we're in a different place. So I think all of those pieces, I was finding this to be a dark slide. And so I wanted to share some of the light that I'm seeing. You know, many of you, when we talk about the economic impact and sustainability, are deeply impacted by Medicaid rates and Medicaid resources to states. So over the weekend, governors got a letter from the new leadership at Health and Human Services, alerting them to the intention to extend PHE for 2021. That's great news. That might change some of our ability to have conversations about funding. This is really a 6.2% FMAP Medicaid bump, for those of you that love all of those words and percentages. So I think that's an important piece. I also think the executive orders, which are a dizzying array, but many of them touch our work. We saw several clear executive orders addressing racism, and some of that will change the way federal grants fund and what the priorities are moving forward. We saw a host of executive orders around COVID, and we are anticipating seeing, I actually just before this got off the phone call with the CDC, and I said, can you tell me when you're going to fix the vaccine thing? Because I really need to know, because it's bugging me and bothering me and keeping me up at night. And they're like, we're really in a place where we're going to have new plans within days and not weeks. So that kind of change and space gives us some things to look forward to. I think it also really frames how we're thinking about framing our work towards sustainability and our work towards continuing these efforts. So a little hope amongst a really challenging environment. So let's dive into it. Let's go to the next slide and talk about sustainability. I mentioned, I'm gonna pause, let Ben get us, thank you. I mentioned that the magic is you. So I think that when we're thinking about sustainability, many of you are already engaged in this work and are able to speak to what pieces of your project are now embedded in other parts of your system, and they will continue. I think that's a piece of your greatness that you absolutely need to own. Sometimes we forget what we've already achieved, and then we don't include it in our sustainability plan. And we miss the opportunity to sell it as we've got a match already. We've got some things set up. So really thinking about that. I also had loved the pleasure of being in the sort of opposite opportunity and being on a state team when looking at sustaining projects. And I do think there's a little bit of a tension where this is an activity that Meg requires you to do. And how do we make sure that this activity works for us and gets us somewhere and isn't just something that's going to go in a drawer? I will say that the last slide in the frame of where we are is the call to action about this is not the time for a file in a drawer, but this has to be a time for what's going to work for to move us forward. I also was really lucky to get to see a little bit of project data and, talk about owning your greatness. It's not just owning your greatness in terms of making a pitch for sustainability around this project, but you did this and have positive data in the middle of all of those emergencies. That is the case for being able to sell your strengths going forward. That anybody could do anything other than hide under the covers in the middle of these 3 emergencies really speaks to any number of audiences about why your value is critical moving forward. I also really loved a great conversation I had about that sustainability isn't limited to this project or the people in it. And I think about one of the values of this project that's been different than other things we've seen in the past are the partners at the table. Your teams represent not just the people at the table, but the organizations at the table. And that changes what we think about sustainability. It's not just sustaining a role, but it's sustaining the partnership and what the organizations bring to the table. So when I think about that, I think about, many of us are bringing our networks to the table. And so that sustainability of that piece is a part of this going forward. It's a strength and a resource that needs to be part of a plan, but potentially it's a need. How do we make sure that this exists going forward? If the key priority for sustaining is that family leadership piece, how do we change the discussion beyond, a nice to have, but a must have? And where are the professional homes for those pieces? The other piece about your greatness that I really would love for you to own and to think about is that trickle up idea. Painfully in healthcare, everything is about adults and usually older Americans who cost so much money and what does Medicare pay for and blah. I think it's a chance for us to pivot a little bit and talk about what works well for complicated families and complicated times can work well for a broader group of families, a broader group of patients. We've shown that this works in the hardest ways and at the hardest time in our history. So how do we move that going forward? So thinking those pieces through can be really helpful. Ben, can we move to the next slide? I think the other piece is, this is a very messy toolbox. It's not mine because I have no skills in the toolbox area. But when I think about this picture and the messy toolbox, I think about all of you and some of what you bring to the sustainability conversation that might get missed otherwise. I would argue, one of the reasons you've been so successful in an environment is that you're used to things not being super easy. You're used to having to pivot to new challenges. Families raising kids with disabilities are awesome at having a plan and a backup plan and a backup plan for the backup plan. That's a tool and a strength and a piece of the sustainability conversation. I think there's also the connections. So you each have tools in this toolbox, but it may be the structure of the toolbox is coming from different places. And you've seen through this process about how they work together. So when, maybe something got a little rusty or broken in one of the systems, then there were tools from another group, another partner that came to play. So thinking that through and really owning those pieces for this American moment. So I think that that's an important piece. I think that you also likely have tools and skills that you haven't claimed and owned. You may be experts in the larger healthcare system around cultural competence and underrepresented communities and underserved communities. Those are pieces that are priorities for this moment and moments to come when we think about the economic realities and systems coming down. So really taking a look at the tools you've used in this project and how do we use them again? So if you've had leadership training or mentoring, how do you make sure that you're owning that as a critical tool for this and it's part of the sustainability plan? So let's go to the next slide. I think the other piece about it is to be a little intentional. So people, I think, worry about sustainability. And actually, I had a great conversation with Bethlyn about that. Some of the sustainability worksheets don't excite me. I don't find them to be the most thrilling pieces in the history of the world. Does anybody else have that challenge? And if you don't, then we need to learn from you about how you get excited about a sustainability outline and worksheet. But I think there's some ways to really think about what do you need and how are we going to move forward? Because it's a little bit, when I think about magic and how do you make that case for sustainability, it's a little bit of storytelling and it's a lot of justification and data. And how do you weave it together? I think the other piece that's really important to think about is to be available to think both in pieces. So how do I sell one piece to somebody and another piece to somebody else? But also, how do I think about reframes? So it may be that one of my partners is really going to need information in a very data way, and somebody else is going to need a good story. And really thinking about how do we work on our sustainability efforts to get the most bang for our buck. It's not that you're going to redo it a million times for a million different purposes, but instead it's that you're going to turn in your homework over and over again, and you're going to slightly tweak it so the teacher didn't notice. But I think that that piece really helps you get a lot of bang for your buck. I do think one of the challenges or things that I worry about is that we tend to only focus on what we still need and not really talk about the overall picture. So how do you really make sure that you're owning your greatness and not missing the pieces when you're working towards sustainability? I feel like I just said a lot of words there that were confusing and didn't mean anything. So let me try to think about it in a different way. But I think that one of the tendencies is to say, we want to be sustained. This is what we've already gotten taken care of. And these are the 5 things we need, but we know we can only get 2. So we're only going to talk about those 2. I think in this case, that might not be wise. Because number one, if you don't ask for 5, you don't end up getting 4 instead of 2. So, it's like the 3-year-old kid bargaining strategy. Ask for a little bit more, but also all 5 are really important and really connected to your work. So it's important when we're thinking about sustainability that we don't oversell that all this will be fine if we just have the 2 pieces. We need to be honest in our teams and with our partners about what's possible. If you only give us X, Y, or Z to move forward, then that's not going to be the same great project that we just had, because this project needs all of these pieces. So really thinking that through gives you a more realistic possibility of selling and also of making a realistic expectation for what comes next, what's possible and what's not possible. I think the next slide is really important. So we'll just briefly talk about this. Because I think one of the pieces that folks often think about with sustainability is all it is about money. And yes, we all need money. We all absolutely need funding, but we need to be thinking about your existing values and where resources already are. Some of this doesn't have to be new money. I know that seems kind of remarkable and maybe a little out there, particularly in an environment where there aren't a lot of resources. But budgets are policy statements. And if family leadership aren't part of permanent funding, then we really haven't reflected the progress of this project. So really thinking that through. And then on my very dark and depressing slide about 3 Wednesdays, I talked a little bit about the hope for the future. And we are seeing large resources coming down the pipe. COVID relief, economic stimulus, the future definitions of Title V. So really being able to frame your sustainability to match those pieces. So on the next slide, we need to pivot to how you're going to have this conversation in this time together. And really, depending on where your team is, I would suggest you use your time for 1 or 2, or one activity or the other. If you feel like you already have a plan it might be really wise to spend your time focusing on an impact statement. Really thinking about, does our plan reflect all of our collective priorities? Is everybody on board? And then what are the accomplishments from everybody? What's everybody's point of view on that? To have that conversation about best data and lessons from others. If you're still looking for a plan, I think it's really helpful to take a look at your goals. Again, to have that honest conversation about, are we on the same page in terms of goals and needs? And then really to do a little bit of reflection on what's already sustained. And some of that may have just been things that have been sustained through the pivot to respond to emergencies over this last year. And then really always grounding it to make sure that your time together is reflecting the point of view of everybody on the team. So I'm going to ask my partners at BU to give us additional directions or other pieces we want to think about.
Great, Rylin, thank you. So first, I'm going to pop into the chat here. Oh, they didn't show up with the links. So the hyperlinks didn't show up here. I'm going to have to pull them elsewhere so we can pull them in. We have in the participant agenda, there are links to all the documents that include the tools that we've given you. And then also the instructions that were just on that slide. And then you'll have your data on hand. Anything else that you want in your individual folder is your own data. So let me pull that in, and then we're going to start having folks move into the breakouts, but you will not have these links in your breakouts, so you want it right now. So I apologize that our plan for how to make these links move to you didn't work. So just give me 1 second. And I'll get there. And then if you want to remind everyone to make sure that they're named while I do this, that would be fantastic.
Yep, so just if you haven't had the opportunity to put your state before your name, if you just wave your mouse over your name in the participant list, it'll give you that option to click more and change your name, rename. Because we'll be having you self-select your breakout groups, and those will pop up in a moment. But sometimes it doesn't work for everyone, so it's easiest for us to get the last few people into the groups if we can just see what state team you're in, because you're going to be in groups by your team. So.
All right, so that's the instructions for you. And then I'm going to put in the link to the participant agenda right now as well, so we can make sure that everyone's got that, because that actually has all the links in it. So this is the participant agenda. And then I'll throw the others in as we're explaining how you will get into your teams. So we've got people coming back in. Welcome as you're beginning to join. We're just waiting for everyone. The breakout rooms close within 60 seconds, so we'll have people coming back. It's been great to watch these numbers, the number of people that joined. It was wonderful to have you all.
The rooms are now closed, Bethlen. Everyone's back.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. So as you can see here, we're going to move into some state team share out. We really hope, I know the team time's never long enough, and we know we had a little lag there getting you in. So we thank you for that, but I hope you had a chance to just start to, wherever you've been at, to keep that going and maybe help consider something in a different way. So we're going to start with the progress that you've sharing out together, and on any of these 3 topics, we'd love for each team. We don't need you to be very formal about it, because we have all been together for a while. So we're just going to have you share. So I'm going to hand it over to Rylin to start facilitating. I'm going to look into the chat, and then we'll see how we do. And we'll have about 20 minutes for this, and just we're going to use a very quick wrap up at the end.
Yeah. So welcome back, everyone. Really would love to hear from each of you something about your time together. It doesn't need to be everything, but you could pick whether you want to share with us sort of the progress that was made, or your top next step, or a burning question. So love for you to come out of mute and share back with us.
I can kick it off for Team Wisconsin.
Thanks, Becky.
Yep, get it over with. You know, that's my theme. Anyway, so our team has been, did apply for a grant that was available here in Wisconsin, and we were declined. And so we have another opportunity to apply for a grant. And so we spent our time reviewing the feedback we received from the other reviewers about why we were not selected. And that discussion led to a really just ripe discussion about how we want to proceed with the work that we started in the CoIIN with developing goal cards, and now we're building a website for families to help select the goals that they want to work on for their child. So that's ultimately for the shared plan of care. But what we really want to do is position our complex medical clinics right in the center of that discussion with families to not only help families select goals and figure out how their complex care clinic may address that, but also how that family can take that goal then to their school and or to their waiver case manager and help them learn the language to get those goals, you know, the child's goals or the family's goals written into the IEP or written into the ISP for their waiver funds. So we really keep the focus on the child and the family rather than the IEP goal or the waiver goal or the shared plan of care goal. It should be, you know, I keep using Johnny, I don't know why, but we'll keep it on Johnny's goal. And the other places can figure out how they can support this family to meet the goals that they have for their child. So we're gonna obviously meet some more. We did not accomplish writing the letter of intent in the 45 minutes we just chatted, but we'll see what comes, and maybe we'll have some additional funding. My guess is that we'll do the work one way or another, but it would be sure nice to have the additional funding.
I love that. I love the reality that while it would have been lovely to get that first grant, it's a chance to take that feedback and think about the conversation and move it forward. So it's sort of awesome that you're already on plan B and you've got, you know, C, D, E, F, G, et cetera to get through. So congratulations.
I see some folks in the chat just affirming how awesome what you're considering is. What we don't need to do this per se in the conversation, but I think one of the things that's helpful is what's resonating with you and what they're saying. If you write that into the chat for them to see what it is that's valuable and you're reflecting that back to them, I think that could be very helpful in them considering how this is useful. Someone's welcome to come off mute and just share how that hit them, because I think that in of itself helps them know what the impact is and how they move forward in continuing to articulate that. Helping families articulate their vision and goals. Thank you, Rahel. And I see like we are working with a system that is siloed, and you're trying to create that integration through a very tangible tool. And considering the context of IEPs in that discussion. And that may even be a different pot of funding through which you could get there.
Thanks, everyone.
So keep continuing to offer feedback to Becky's team. But is there somebody else that wants to share your next steps, burning questions?
You know, this is Rahel from Texas. Hi, and it is it's very similar to Wisconsin. I think maybe we just also need to chat offline. We also took on the delivery system transformation task seriously and figured how do we change the way we see families, you know, during their well child check. And we're calling it now by family suggestion, whole child check. And during that time, use the time together to, number one, have these meaningful conversations where they would articulate all of their goals, and we will give them a tool to have that fully articulated, and everybody works off of that blueprint. We did also submit a grant to the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and we did not get that as well. And as an aside, and we are also putting a letter of intent for another local potential source of money. It is a bit frustrating for me to see that there are large funds that should support this kind of service transformation. Some are, used in the 1115 waiver, where delivery system transformation, district delivery system reform is the name of the projects, and there's billions of dollars going there. And it's still, I think the payment is tied either to some sort of hospital metrics, and I wish it was structured in such a way that they actually paid for the actual model. Is there an integrated model? Are people actually being seen together? Is there one blueprint that's being developed? And if that is happening, then there is delivery system transformation, because the current delivery system does not do that. So we have a whole lot of stuff going for us in Texas, a highly committed Health and Human Services Department, and a very committed MCO partner, the Blue Cross Blue Shield folks, and Title V. And now, in the last few months, we have a parent work group that is highly engaged and highly talented. We're learning so much from these parents, one of whom is sort of an expert in participatory action research. So they're actually defining the outcome measures that matter to them, that we should be including. How do we hold ourselves accountable? And how do we make this sort of oversight not become the work? How can you not create a whole lot of process just to measure processes? So there's quite a lot of work going on. We have the challenge that the funding structure is not there, and so we're struggling through that as well.
I love the realistic synergy about the challenges and funders and the grants that aren't funded, and the framing that folks aren't looking for this kind of change that we know matters so much. And so, some of that work is, how do we make the case so that they're funding these types of pieces?
Just want to say, I'm looking at the comments and I saw Barbara and others commenting on the whole child. That came directly from a parent. Parent says, the well child, like they can't get their head around what that is just not their reality and true to their experience. And so immediately the clinic changed it.
So that
It came directly from the parents.
Yeah, there's a couple of things about that. So I think that we've seen in all of these teams, and everyone speaking to the responsiveness of the teams in the family-driven process at all levels, and that the way in which you've been able to make progress in those areas, that's a very important piece to articulate and to continue to articulate, because that in and of itself is impact that we were talking while you were all in we had our own little faculty team time. And one of the things that came up, Jennifer, if you want to speak to what you were thinking as far as you have these QI projects and what in retrospect you realize how you could have shared that further.
Hey folks, as a pediatrician with a busy practice and kids with special needs, dumping a quality improvement project on top of your daily work is already a sign of bravery. But when you do it in a pandemic, I think you get the superhero awards. So, pat yourself on the back. One of the things that, and there are 20 million things I did wrong, but one of the things I did wrong with our QI work is our QI team knew all what was going on. We shared our data with each other, including the family that was involved, but we didn't sit down and tell our practice partners what was going on. So I would really encourage you to talk with the people around you, whether it be the physical medicine and rehab clinic, whether it be the pulmonologist, that you share with them what you've done, because it is incredibly important. And seeing the numbers go up on your run charts were pretty amazing. I did ask, I think Mary's already done some of this, that the annotations be put on there to say, oh, guess what? This is when the pandemic was declared. this is when the hurricane hit, this is when the fires hit, so that you guys get the regional sense as well of the magic that you have done. I also suggested, help me if I'm forgetting anything, Bethlyn, that your state AAP chapters are a great place for you to do a 30-minute, 45-minute PowerPoint presentation, say, hey, look what we did. Remember that those practices may be competing with yours. They may be learning from you about how to do things, beg your pardon on the phone. And so it's a great place for you to share, and they need people to present. So those would be great places that are not like, let's go talk to Congress, but they're places where you can begin to spread right near where you are, and they can see the benefit of what you've done. Thank you for all this work.
I have something else I want to say, because we're thinking about transformation and we're talking about impact. And I personally have changed so much having the experience of being in this project. I mean, I'm a parent. A lot of you already have met Sophie somewhere. And I went to Partners in Policymaking, and my background was in advocacy. So, you know, I thought I understood family engagement, right? I mean, even coming into this. But my lens and my approach to my work in other areas and other projects is different today than it was 3 years ago, because of seeing how the family work group has impacted this project. And sometimes we learn by doing, and I've just never been part of anything that really that just puts it kind of in your bloodstream about what it is and how, I could say families need to be involved in the outset, but I see how it makes such a difference. And I'm saying that intentionally here because I imagine that others, and I wasn't designated as the family representative for my program on Title V, but if other others not wearing the family hat have seen it. And I just think that's a strength of our team, but I imagine of all the teams, and a real impact in changing how we approach our work to engage family for real.
Yeah, I'm so grateful that you raised that, because I think the way families have been engaged in this project is different and has been different than previous efforts. And frankly, I think it's a key part of the secret sauce. And so how do we think about that in terms of sustainability? And then also, how do we think about that in terms of, lessons learned for other systems, that this worked well and made the impact that it did because of the partnerships and expertise, and that it's the individuals in the room, but the connections to the organizations that were supports and professional homes and mentorship. And, I'm looking at Team Alabama, and I see, some of my favorite mentors there, but also I know some of that ability to support each other in this work. And so I think there's so much richness in this space.
And that, to articulate that, to look at that, there were some other suggestions around when you look at that cycle 3 data, everyone has, think about this, remarkable. When we had cycle 2 data that ended at April 30th. So we essentially have, this is a story of COVID as well, because your cycle 3 data occurred during the context of the worst beginning part of COVID pandemic hitting the nation. So you look at that, you annotate, you look at what drove that. Talk to your families, talk to your leaders, and that's an integral part of your story, because if you were able to do that in the context of the pandemic and improve things, I think that would get the ear of anyone for any vulnerable population across the lifespan. And I think that speaks as a lot of the story that we have to share. And thank you I think this is beyond a team effort. I think one of the things that we recognize is that we were talking that you all, the degree of the way in which you've been able to show up and persist amidst it all, I just don't think you can understate that. And It was described as a testament to the human spirit. But I think that the fact that everyone's done that, it's not just a feel-good story. It is key to using it in concert with your data, in concert with the family focus groups, considering unmet need and how that comes together to have a system that actually serves people and gets to outcomes. And that's where your impact statement, if you look at some of that, it can really articulate that in a very succinct way and can be very useful to you. And then, and if you have consensus around that, for them pulling apart different pieces as you frame your sustainability. Another thing that we mentioned too was that don't underestimate the power of what you've already been able to accomplish, but also those low-hanging fruits. A lot of you were talking about those, like, oh yeah, we know we're going to do that, but we're not sure about this. But those low-hanging fruits may right now really be good enough. And that's important to recognize and to continue moving forward with that in this space too. So any other thoughts? And I'd love to hear from other team we have 1 more minute, and then we're going to throw the evaluation link into the chat and continue on with next steps.
So this is Jill from Washington State. I think one thing we talked about that's kind of in that middle component is really kind of charting partnerships, potential folks to share with, and then our data and our stories. Which one fits in which space, what components out of what the work that we do, what worked and what didn't fit, what does that whole story look like, and how do we share it out to see how the work can catch on in these new components with these new folks or with folks we've already worked with. You know, what can they take out of the work that was done? So that was one thing we talked about building.
That's a great point. I think that that's a new Team Washington, working with your existing infrastructure and the partnerships that really could coalesce here and extending that in whatever ways you can to places where it exists. Rylin, did you want to say something? And then we're going to need to end.
Yeah, no, I just think that's sort of really wise to be like in your description, you just have a strategy for how to use the storytelling to make the impact, which is just, you know, really what, you know, sustainability and dissemination are and how we're going to move forward. So I love it.
Ben,
what are our next steps?
We got to throw in that last slide for next steps. And please note the chat too. If anyone else had other thoughts, things or last high level stuff you want to share, please do. And Jessica's going to close us out. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, everyone, thanks again. So here's our sustainability next steps. So teamwork, including care coordination academy teams. There will be resources that are going to be open to all. That's coming soon. There are quite a few of you who have emailed about that, and thank you so much for coming up with a really grand plan to make that work. Group TA, including webinars, varied affinity groups, the affinity groups that currently exist, plus we're able to add additional affinity groups as needed, coaching, individual consultations, that includes the wonderful Steve Fenton and others. Also FESAT, a reminder that FESAT action plans are due by the end of January. Email your completed action plans to Kara Coleman and Mary Jo Palladino of Family Voices, and you should know who all those folks are. As far as the ECHO goes, it's extended through March 2021, every first and third Wednesday, 11 to 12, that's in Eastern time. And then our April half-day virtual meeting, which will be occurring virtually and not in person, unfortunately. It will now be a half-day virtual Zoom call, and that's 4/27, 12 to 4, and again, that's Eastern time. And then again, please complete the evaluation for this webinar. That's the link there, but also we put the link in the chat, and there it is again. Thank you, Bethlyn. Thank you all so much for a really great afternoon today.
And we will continue the conversation, so we're not done, but this was a great way to kind of get us pivoting there and staying there for, we have 6 months more. So as you see, we have a bunch of ways we're going to try to support you. And please, anything else in the evaluation you can think of, any next questions you have, we can start meeting in smaller groups where you can really dive deeper according to what your interests are and what aligns. And we'll do that work behind the scenes if you share with us. Any other comments, feel free to throw them in the chat. And sorry to be a few minutes over, but thank you so much for your time, everybody. And Rylin, thank you for leading the charge today and keeping our eyes on this prize and for the extraordinary work of this group.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. It was great to see you.